let's go ahead and get started.
I gotta create space for
As I
meetings and all
told
that
you
kind of stuff, so.
in the email, our presenter today is Jim Wilkins. He's one of my favorite people, as well as one of my favorite presenters. He is a French teacher. I'm skeptical. He's a professor of French, and I actually met him. We were teaching together in Russia. And so I did a hard recruit to get him to come to Lee.
2 years, it lasted 2 years.
It lasted 2 years. A lot of pictures of Lee, postcards taped to his door, that sort of thing. And it-
Life is
and
better
it-
in Tennessee, I remember.
Yeah, like that.
postcards.
Well, he was at Calvin,
Calvin.
so, you know,
Oh.
we are much funnier. Much
Oh,
funnier.
you are, yeah.
And so I thought his personality kind of went with ours. So I've heard him talk several times about how he assesses learning in his classes. And one of the things I like about using his work is that he has classes from first semester of French all the way up through the literature, French literature. So he assesses a lot of different kinds of learning. And he has a lot of different ideas about how to do that. So let's hear from Jim.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here with you today. We closed the window so you can see how nice it is outside. You can see a little bit of the sun seeping through there, but it's good to be with you today. I put a note card in front of everybody's packet here with just a few handouts. What I'd like you to do real quickly, if you would, just take 1 minute, and I know this is the last new faculty
This
seminar.
semester.
This semester, right, this semester. I don't want to give any false impressions.
Also.
This is your last one this semester. So what I want you to do is I want you to write what you think an exam question might be for this semester in the new faculty meetings. So quickly, just jot down.
Essay or-
There are no limits on that? No. I mean, yeah, it could be an essay question. Don't make your question an essay length question, but if you would, just write down a question that you think, if we were creating a final exam, if Carolyn were going to do a final exam for this semester, what's a good question do you think
I hadn't
would
thought
go
of
in
that,
exam?
but it's a totally good idea.
I think so too. So you might have one more session before school. Yeah, you don't have to know the answer.
Oh, you don't?
No, I heard that comment. That's really great, actually. Put your name on that so I remember who you are. A question you might use on a final exam for this semester of new faculty meetings. We're going to look at them later. Oh, and you don't have to put your names on these. Do not identify yourself. Just another 30 seconds or so. Okay, if you would, pass your cards down, and I'm going to have my assistant, Carolyn, collect the final exam questions, and hopefully we'll have time to take a look at those toward the end of our session here today. I think I asked Carolyn this the last time I was asked to come speak about assessment. That is, why do you ask me to come and talk about assessment? And I always question this match between myself and this topic because to me assessment is like this, if I could compare it to a big body of water, and I'm just constantly swimming around in it and always finding new areas and, you know, sinking a little bit, floating a little bit, and always trying to find the right way to do what we call assessment. I have this first slide might look a little foreboding, but it's actually going to be a less formal slide presentation than that. I'm going to use a technique that I use with all of my students in my classes. If we ever have a presentation, they're only allowed to use 7 slides, and they can only have 7 words on each slide. They can only put 7 words on each slide, and they have to limit themselves to 7 slides. So, to get the discussion started here, we did that already. The first slide's already over. Write the test question, new faculty orientation exam. So that one is already over. That's 7 words. I counted these about 10 times before I left the office today. This next one is test. I had ideas where I thought the word test came from, but test, in one of its most ancient forms, meant a vessel that was used to assay precious metals. That's where they put precious metals in, heat them up to see their worth and their value, which I thought was interesting. And then the word assessment, a related word, meant, in one of its older forms, to determine charges, damages to be paid. I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. We test our students, we assess our students to tell us if we've damaged them in any way, I guess, in some respects, and the charges and actually what they've learned and what we've taught them is worth. I think it all comes back to that. And then a few thoughts about assessment. Test the way we teach. This is something that I came to realize a few years ago, is that I taught a completely different way than I tested. I tested like I was a lecturer, but all my learning in the classroom was done collaboratively, it was done in groups, it was individual learning, but yet all my testing was as if I had lectured and poured all the information out like a bucket. Somebody had a quote about teaching that was like, sometimes people teach as if they're throwing water out of a bucket onto their students and expect the students to kind of grasp what's in it, and mostly it just slides through their fingers. But test the way we teach. And this one, good assessment teaches. Every good assessment should be a teaching experience. Students should learn when they do a test. And this one, we teach and we test toward proficiency. And that's actually where I'd like to start. I was talking around the copier today with another faculty member. We were talking about in the 60s. I heard about this. I wasn't actually there. But that was a bad one. That was a bad one. So anyway, what we were talking about is that French, I lived in a community that was 2/3 Hispanic near Chicago. And French was the only world language taught in the public school system. And it's because French was thought of as the language of intellectuals. It was thought of as the language of high society. And that if you were ever going to be a diplomat or ever going to be a professor, you needed to know French. So that was the first language that I ever took in school. And it wasn't until about 7 or 8 years later that Spanish actually became a language that we taught in the schools there, which was kind of odd to me. And the focus changed from something that was thought as intellectual, as a sign of knowing, as a sign of skill, to a language that was perceived as something more useful. And it's kind of this shift in the way we used to see education as a collection of knowledge to be garnered, as knowing is higher than what we can actually do with the language. And that's what I mean by this word proficiency here. I do testing for the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages. So a lot of my remarks today are going to be about assessing foreign language ability, foreign language competency. But one thing we do is, when I was doing training to become a certified tester, is we had to get into the mindset that what we want people to be able to show us is not what they know about the language, but what they can actually do with the language. I've had students, and I'm sure if you've taken a foreign language class, you study something very difficult, like the subjunctive mood or the conditional tense. You remember those ringing bells, aren't they? It's all coming back. And you take the quiz, and you get A's on your quizzes, and you did really great. You got an A in French, you got an A in Spanish, whatever language it was. But then you went to a French-speaking country or a Spanish-speaking country and couldn't say anything. And it's because we amassed a lot of knowledge, and students learned a lot about the language, but we never really assessed what they were able to do with the language. A lot of times their first assessment was actually landing in Paris and trying to find their way to downtown Paris from the airport. That was their first language assessment. And those are the kind of things we want to talk about today, is getting, the reason I find this, even though sometimes it's frightening, this frightening thing about assessment and doing correct assessment, doing good assessment that gauges not only what we teach, but gauges what we learn and how people learn and how we teach. But learning to assess things that are important in ways that are important. And it takes time to kind of tear your mind and yourself away from traditional paper testing and feeling comfortable with students taking tests that are on the computer and finding ways to avoid cheating and all those kind of things. It's a huge morass, but a fun morass to be involved in. And I have prepared for you some things, and I'm talking to the choir here. I know that because you assess all the time, you do different kinds of assessment. I would love to hear sometimes some of the things that you do with assessment. But what I prepared here for you on this first sheet is a list of some really good websites. I don't know if you're aware of them or not, but they're really good websites for people that are interested in kind of doing non-traditional testing, and especially a lot of rubric writing, rubric assessments, but assessing not only individual skill, but what people can do as a team. Not only what they can do as an individual, what can they do as a team? What can they do when they're thinking out of the box, and what can they actually do with the things that we say we're teaching them? There are a lot of customizable rubric templates on some of these sites, good sites for designing good, effective rubrics. And while they talk about designing rubrics, they're giving some really good ideas on teaching and assessing. I think they're really good. So I'm going to give this to you kind of as a handout you can take with you and look at some of the things that they offer there. So I took this workshop, became a certified tester, and so I had to start thinking with my students, what kinds of things could I assess that I've not been assessing? I mean, I've given the quizzes, the verb forms and all those kind of things you do. Even in theology, I imagine you test discrete item things, like names of people, scripture passages, whatever you do in a theology course, the Bible course, in a science course, in a math course. But I wanted to expand this disconnect between what my students were learning and what I really wanted them to be able to do. So what I started doing was some pretty non-traditional testing, and some of it were massive failures, and some of it were quite successful. And so I'd like to share with you some of the ideas that I've used recently. I pulled these ideas off of tests and stuff that I've done recently. There are 4 of them that I'm going to share with you on the second handout, just to kind of give you an idea of the kind of things that I'm talking about as we consider assessment. I teach a course that is called the Francophone World, and in the Francophone World, our students in French learn that the French-speaking world goes way beyond France and French-speaking Europe. And so we study parts of the world that a lot of them are not familiar with that actually are French-speaking, like Canada. There's a country in South America that's actually French-speaking. The Caribbean, parts of the Oceania, parts of the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean, Madagascar, number of countries in Africa, of course, and the Middle East, of course, is still a major center of Francophone culture. So in this course, we look at a lot of people that are famous in the Francophone world. We look at places. It's interesting. We did a segment the other week on the genocide in Rwanda, and I was amazed at how many students said they had never heard of the genocide in Rwanda. They had never heard that there were 1 million people killed in 100 days in Africa. So that was really quite an eye-opener for them. And so when I assessed them, I wanted to assess them on something a little broader than just where did the genocide take place, how many people were killed, and those very discrete item things. Anyway, here's one of the semester projects we did in that course. Semester project, they have to do it in French, of course. They have a textbook that's called La Civilisation Française, and in that textbook, I had them look at the table of contents, which we really didn't follow meticulously, but it kind of laid things out, give them an idea of these different parts of the Francophone world. Un peu de géographie et d'histoire, littérature, film, personnalité phare, la vie de tous les jours, and actualité. I'm sure you understand that, a little bit of geography, some literature, film, personality. Phare means a famous personality. La vie de tous les jours, life, everyday life, and then actualité are the news, recent things happening in those countries. So what I had the students do as a project to assess their learning this semester is I had them develop a draft chapter for the second edition of the text. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a second edition of the text, but I'm assuming that someday there will be. But I wanted them to draft a chapter for the second edition of that text on one of the Francophone areas in the world that we were not able to cover. There are so many of them, there's no way you can cover everything, as it is in all your fields. There's just no way you get to it all. But anyway, using literature, in addition to the 4 elements listed above, the components of each of the chapters, they were to add news items, current events. Under literature film, they could select a poem or essay written by someone, blah, 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 blah. And they actually have to present a draft, those are due this Friday, by the way, a draft for a chapter involving a country that was not addressed in that textbook. So why is that a good assessment? To me, you hate to say your own assessments are really good assessments, but
That's what you're here for.
I know, that's why I'm here. But it's a good assessment because it measures more than just dates and people associated with countries, but it measures their ability to think about these countries, to discover on their own things that would be considered important about each of them, to consider things that would be interesting for English speakers to know about the Francophone world. So anyway, that's just one assignment that I gave as an assessment in this course. Another assessment, B, we're going to skip B. Let's go right to C. Okay, let's go right to C. The student, you've been appointed to head a committee of the OIF, which is the international organization of the Francophonie. And this committee is charged with publicizing the Francophonie in your region of the world. As possible chairperson of the committee, you're asked to write a 2-page draft of a working document, and here's the draft purpose and proposed content. Explain to the committee the purpose of the OIF. And then number 2, use 2 of the Francophone countries to explain your commitment to the justification for this project. Why is it each important geographically, politically, linguistically, culturally? And then close your document with a short discussion of why you feel your country should become part of the OIF. And then other students played the role of the OIF committee and had to consider each of the proposals as to why they would be important, and had to decide which regions of the United States they would actually report la francophonie in their part of the country. The last one. The goal of this activity was to assess ability to use acquired knowledge to critically think, to state, solve problems or issues in the Francophone world. Task was to plan a dinner party. I divided students into the group for this activity, for this assessment, and the students in the class were asked to host a dinner party for Francophone celebrities who had come to the university for a Francophone conference. Invited were Michel Tremblay from Quebec, Zachary Richard, a Cajun poet from Louisiana, Jean Bernabé, a writer from Martinique, and Danny Laferrière, a writer from Haiti. And their task was to decide together where at the dining table they would seat the invited guests, who will sit next to whom. Write the person's name next to the seats, and if you look on the last page, you have an imaginary table there that they would use to seat their guests at the dinner. Write the person's name next to the seats, and this had to be a strategic decision. They had to ask themselves, with whom would you have the most interesting conversations, and why? What do we know about them and their regions that make us think they might easily engage? Consider the following: history, current events, political status, linguistic situation of each person's region. And then they had to write a summary in French of why they selected the seating arrangement that they selected. So to do this, they actually had to know the people that we were talking about, what they taught, what they wrote about, what they spoke about, what they sang about, and put them in an order around the table that would be interesting to the person next to them. So Michel Tremblay had to be interested in the guy that was sitting next to him, and then next to the student who was sitting on the other side of them, and why they found that person interesting and why they should be put together. So I give you these 3 examples to give you some examples of thinking outside the box on assessment. One thing I've become very convinced of in recent years is that not every assessment has to be graded. Not everything needs a grade. Not everything needs a letter. Because I find letters really kind of meaningless when you put it, when you try to explain to somebody why you got an A and not a B. I much prefer to use rubrics in assessment. I much prefer to have non-graded assignments, if possible, to allow students to think without the threat of grade hanging over their head, and to allow them to think and explore, make mistakes and failures. There are no failures. I forget who said this, Robert Allen, I think, said there are no failures, there's only feedback. So to to give a lot of feedback to students on the way they're thinking rather than on the things they've remembered for a quiz or remembered for a test. And if you look at the back of that, if you look at the back sheet, let me get you here. Is it hot in here or am I about to faint?
It's hot here.
It is hot. Okay. I've given you a list also, this green list right here. These are can-do statements, and these are things that we use in these are things that we use in foreign languages for students to assess themselves. That's another aspect of assessment that's become important with us, and that is having students assess their own ability in language. Now, if you'll look at the items here, at the intermediate level of speech, this is what a person should be able to do. None of these are things that you know about the language. They're not, have you studied the past tense? Have you studied house vocabulary? Have you dabbled in the subjunctive? Dabbling and subjunctive are not two words that usually go together. But anyway, have you? But they're all things of what you can actually do with the things that you're learning. I can be the first to start a conversation. I can ask for information. I can talk about my interests and hobbies. I can schedule an appointment. I can talk about artists from other countries. I can talk about historical events. I can give the basic rules of a game or sport and answer questions about them, rather than I can use the imperative forms. It's making the shift and helping students to see that what we teach them, the discrete item things that we teach them, are simply tools to help them do something with what they're learning. And I would just imagine in every field that we teach here at the university, there is that dichotomy of the things that we have to teach them as tools, and then their ability to use those tools to do something with what they learn. And this is where if you look at the back sheet, I'm going to go over this real quickly, and then I'm going to open this up for a little bit of discussion, actually. And then we're going to look at your questions for your final exam. I'll let Carolyn read them out loud. A few of them. You can pick the best ones, okay. Grade free assignments, already talked about that. Assessing participation, one form of assessment that I think often goes underestimated, and that is assessing participation. Sometimes we feel if we have a class of 40 people, how do you assess participation? That's very difficult to do. The trick is that you don't have to assess everybody every class will be. You can assess, say, I'm going to assess 7 people today in class. I'm going to listen to these 7 people. I'm going to see how they're doing, what they're doing, and then I'm going to give them some feedback on their participation in the class, rather than trying to assess all 40 people at one time. So it might take you a whole week to assess a class of 30. Let's say take 3 class periods, 4 class periods to do that. But I think that's a valuable thing to do, and that's something that often goes under-assessed, is how people actually how they participate. Not that they have to have a grade on that participation, but I think it's interesting to give them feedback on the way that they do participate, the questions that they ask, and things like that. 3-minute post-learning assessments. These are good ways to self-assess learning. After a class, I like to ask students, what 2 things did you learn today? What 2 things did you learn today? Or what did I tell you were going to learn today and you did not learn today? What did we not cover that was in my original list of things we're going to do in class today? The burning questions, which is number 5 on this list. I like this. I like to have a notepad sitting around the room where students can take a stick-em, they can write a burning question on the stick-em note and then post it up at some point at the far end of the room on the wall, or they can post it on a whiteboard or something like that. And then I go around at the end of the class, collect those questions, and then try to respond to the questions. They do them anonymously, they don't have to do them on, even though I do see them get up to the board and stick them on the board. But it's a great way of them being able to ask questions in a non-threatening way. And of course, there are a lot of things you can do on your phone apps, computer apps, laptops, and things like that, that allow you that anonymity in asking questions as well and participating. Now, I'd be curious to know how many of you have kind of explored with non-traditional ways of testing, and what some of those things might be. And by non-traditional, and I'm not saying paper testing is bad, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying, getting away from the paper test, what are some ways that you assess now that maybe you didn't always assess, but that are kind of a break from what we think of as traditional assessment? Yes?
Before, in one of my classes, I produced a theater as a final examination in a research class.
Can you repeat that? Yeah, okay.
So we created a small play where we have to defend either the qualitative method or positives and some of the weaknesses, and became the final exam for that class became like a trial. We tried to see which one would win. So it was very unorthodox.
But fun.
Very fun.
I'll bet, yeah. Yeah, that's great. Any others, things that you tried recently that work? Maybe things that failed. I've done a number of those recently. But nothing ventured, nothing gained, what I was telling
We,
Yes.
we're a little bit different.
Uh-huh.
We're very hands-on oriented. So in the simulation lab, for instance, it's about the experience
Mhm.
and the immersive experience, where we finally come away with a learning and they'll never forget what they did wrong, so to say. So if they make a mistake, we talk about it, it's safe practice, and then they walk away with something new. So whether that's seeing a disease that they would never see if they just got to go out to the hospital to see patients that day,
Yeah.
or so we do that non-threatening experience. It's not a very
I like that. Do you do that at all levels? Like, do you do that like with
except
beginners
for
or?
the freshmen.
Except for the freshmen?
So once they have begun their clinical
Mhm.
rotations, they get to come in the sim lab and have those experiences.
Wish we could teach those dummies to speak Spanish and French and kind of use robots. I keep calling them dummies. I volunteered to be a dummy over
Those are
the
called
nursing school.
mannequins.
Mannequins, yes, that's what I meant. And, yeah, that's fascinating. I just love that the day I saw those in operation.
Come see us.
Yeah. Yes.
One of the things I do, I guess, is sort of self-assessment, is that after I've really gone through something I think is really important that they need to understand, that's more of a concept and not just a list of things. I have them all close their books, put everything up, and I tell them, now you have to turn to your neighbor and explain to them this concept as if they know nothing about it. And then I say, give them feedback. Do you understand what they're talking about? And that's to help them. And I say, now, if you struggled with this, you need to reread it, and then you need to make an appointment to come see me, because this is probably gonna be on your exam. It won't be the last time you hear of this. So this is a good way for you to know where you stand and whether you might need a little help or not.
I like that. Yeah, good. Interesting. What else? Yes.
I teach a 50-student section on music and culture, and many of those students are not altogether thrilled about being in the room. And so the first day of class, I asked them to get their phones out and see the last piece of music they listened to, and turn to someone next to them and talk about it. And we're going to do the same thing at the end of the term, come back to that same piece of music. And my goal is they'll be able to use music vocabulary more effectively, and they'll
That's
be able
excellent.
to bring that vocabulary into their own real world.
So that will show some progression, actually some learning,
Maybe.
hopefully. Yeah. So how did you some way note the assessments, or how do you remember what they did initially with
I
that
did it,
exercise?
it was all informal,
Okay.
nobody knew anybody else, least of all me. So, I floated around a little bit and tried to listen.
Okay.
But it was all just an opportunity to get them connected with, what we're gonna talk about in here is actually real music. You actually already listen to music, really you do. So,
Well, that's very good. I was reading on one of these rubric sites that I was double checking before I put them on that sheet today, and one of them had a very interesting thing, is that make sure your students use the rubric that you give them
yes.
to evaluate them. In other words, don't just hand them a rubric and say this is how you're going to be evaluated, but actually do an exercise, something like that, and have them use the rubric to judge someone else's work or do a peer review or something, or review their own. And what I find is when students self-evaluate, is they often self-evaluate much harder on themselves than I would. Part of that's probably modesty, I guess. Interesting. What else? Those are great ideas.
It's really out there. So I like to think with no box. I'm just thinking outside the box, I think with no box. I have produced this assessment using video games where folks would log into a system, which by the way would have to, maybe somebody wants to see how this actually works, But again, in my class in research and plagiarism, one of the assignments was to go into the video games, so Mark through the game, that you have to talk with folks within the system and collect the data to be able to write a paper by the end of the game. But everything's self-contained in that quest. So by using video games, we're able to, of course, assess if folks were able to write the paper without plagiarizing.
No. Interesting. Great. Anyone else?
That's the science guys.
Yes, the science guys. I want to ask the theology guys to the Bible and theology and Christian ministries as well. Where are the science guys?
We're back
Says
here.
get
Yes, the
roasted.
science guys.
Yeah, at least some of them. Well, I run a pretty traditional classroom, and I've noticed, sometimes I'll have students work an example, and I just sort of get, I don't know, walk around the classroom, and half the class isn't really participating. So, last year, I gave my students an impossibly hard quiz. And I gave it 5 minutes to work on it, and so they all sweat, a lot of them sweat for about 5 minutes. If you would like to, you may work with a partner. And they all were really engaged in that quiz. But so that's usually what I try to do, is try to figure out some way to get them more engaged in what we're talking about.
Yeah, that really highlights an interesting point, I think, is if you do you do a lot of collaborative work in your classes? I mean, do they do a lot of pair work or
I try to work in it as much as I
problems?
can, but normally it's I gotta lecture and show them how to do something before they can sort of work something similar.
But often if you do a lot of collaborative work or group work or stuff like that, they're more comfortable doing that in an assessment as well.
Mhm.
Design assessments. Yeah, that's great. Yes.
This isn't super definitive, it's just based on my experience. I teach filmmaking classes, and anytime I've ever written and directed something, sometime after, I always think, now I know how I should make this movie, now that I've done it. And so what I want to do, I haven't done it yet, is at the beginning of the class, have them bring in the most recent thing that they've directed, and then ask those questions. Now that you've directed this, how would you do it? Again, in the self-assessment.
Yeah.
So it's just,
Yeah, that's very good. Excellent. Yes, or science, or
One of the things we do for the nursing chemistry class we teach is they have a medication project. So they've been given a medication that goes along with the disease that it covers. And then we give them the rubric ahead of time on how that will be graded. And so that's an interesting piece you said about how they typically utilize a rubric when we give them a poster and have them grade it, and they traditionally tear it to shreds. I would have given a 0 here, and I'm like, well, I at least gave them a 3. They said something. So that's an interesting statement that seems to play out. But it's a very overarching poster where they have to not only present on paper, but then they present in a symposium that Friday night, 5 to 8, or in the SMC, where they present these ideas that we've talked about semester long: biological targets, polarity of molecules, functional group, all of these concepts. And it's really interesting to see those who, even that step of, I can figure it out enough to put it on paper, do they know it enough to then even talk about it? And so even kind of a stair step there between those and putting them all together.
how many of you do online assessment? Any of your assessments done online? You do online assessment, and what does that consist of?
Basically, for every topic that we're covering, I do a kind of pre-post, where there's, the pre is basically just trying to get them engaged with the material before coming to class. And then after we discuss it a bit in class, they have a follow-up online that they do that's kind of applying those topics to more complicated problems. I use a lot of material from the publisher and kind of tweak it for what I cover, so I don't have to go from scratch, that's very labor intensive. But that's been effective in being able to very frequently get them to have something that's giving them feedback, so it's 3-4 times throughout the week, they're going in and doing something, even if it's a small bit. So you don't have this kind of long spans of nothing and then, oh wait, what are we talking about again? And you lose that momentum.
And getting immediate feedback on it. Yeah, I've been doing a lot, experimenting a lot more with online testing that comes from publishers. They have a lot of new testing formats. I'm never really completely happy with a lot of the stuff that they do, but it can be useful, like to schedule online tests, limit the number of times they're allowed to pass to spend an online test, and then compare how they do it on online compared to the next more traditional paper in-class collaborative test. It's interesting. You just have to get a publisher that designs a well-working
Yes,
site.
That's key, and so the virtue of being online is that it can be adaptive and interactive in
Yes,
ways that
that's right.
other ones can't.
Yeah, that's right. Well, if there are no more comments from everybody else, would you like to read some of those questions? I'd be curious to see what everybody put for a final assessment for this semester.
Describe a student who stands out to you and discuss his or her progress in your class. What strategies were most successful with him or her, and how did you document his or her growth? Describe 3 difficulties a new faculty member might encounter in their first year. For each scenario, list resources available at Lee to help address the situation. That's cool. What is the most important way to improve students' engagement in class? What are Lee's University's priorities and values regarding faculty participation in the learning environment? There's some that were a little bit more objective. Give a brief synopsis, well, maybe not this one. Give a brief synopsis of the history of Lee University. Describe the evolution of college to university in no more than 200 words. Explain the ways in which our faith is integrated into the core values of Lee and offer 3 practical examples. Explain the tools available to assist students who are struggling at Lee University. What should faculty do if we know of a student we suspect has emotional issues? When is the appropriate time to contact the counseling office when dealing with concerns about a student's behavior? What services are provided through the hub?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, good
Those
questions.
are great.
Describe fit, or describe the concept of fit at Lee. That is really your spinal antenna right there. For life, not for me.
I'd like to see the answers.
Compare and contrast the styles of 2 speakers this semester. Why does Lee place, this is more of an assessment of Lee, I think. Why does Lee place so much emphasis on student evaluations as primary assessment of professors? Why, oh why? Explain in great detail one concept you have applied from our seminars this semester. In great detail, by the way.
Great detail, yeah.
This is not limited to 200 words. What Lee resources are available to help improve student success? There's a series on student success. Lee University is always striving for excellence. List ways that Lee assists students to success. I love this one. Name a famous evangelist who attended Lee. Which CTE new faculty session was the most helpful and why? How are you applying it to your notes? I don't know what that last word is, but it looks like BMMMMT. So, how are you applying it to your, you tell me. Give 1 point from the presentation given by President Kahn. Also a good idea. what scripture
Let me
is
speak here.
inscribed in every building on our campus and why?
That's an extra credit question.
Can you correctly identify the QEP goals for the university? This one is sort of the same. What three core values of LEAD seemed most prominently highlighted in the new faculty sessions this semester? That's it.
Seems like there's a lot of self-assessment going on, and I think we'll end with that, and that's an important part of assessment, I think, and that is the assessment we do on ourselves when we walk out of a classroom. And
Which is good.
you know when it goes wrong, and you know when it goes well, and I'm sure those of you who've preached in public in churches and things, you've had that same feeling, and you say, "Wow, that message seemed like it went nowhere." And it may or may not have, but that's important. It's that after-teaching reflection. I think that's important to all of us. How do I do better next time? I do that every time I walk into a class, like, man, I'm either going to not teach that anymore, or I'm just going to do it totally different next time, because that was just way wrong. Or sometimes when it goes well, you think that was a great way to teach it, or a great way to present it. So. But anyway, thank you. It's good, and it's nice to meet you all, your first year at Lee University, ending up your first year. Congratulations. Oh, your first semester, ending up your first semester, but you're in your first
To
year.
graduate from my
Yeah, that's right.
program.
And you still have
We have a
three.
semester
You still
to
have
go.
three more sessions next
sessions.
semester. That's right. But welcome to Lee, and I hope it's been a good semester for you. Happy holiday, and enjoy the next full week after Thanksgiving.